Helena Brooks never flinched when a gun was pointed at her, but when a biker gang grabbed her by the collar that night in the desert, they had no idea they were laying hands on the director of the FBI. The night was thick with heat, as the Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a half-moon sky. Crickets sang faintly in the dry brush, and the hum of the wind carried the distant echo of engines. Out on Highway 9, a black SUV rolled slowly to a stop beside an abandoned gas station that had long been forgotten by travelers. Its windows were tinted, its paint spotless despite the dust that clung to everything around it. The driver's door opened, and a tall black woman stepped out. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and confident, as if she had no reason to fear the darkness surrounding her. She adjusted her leather jacket and checked her phone, the screen's glow briefly lighting her sharp, observant eye. A few miles down the road, the night quiet was shattered by a pack of roaring motorcycles cutting through the desert like a storm. The Iron Serpents were on one of their late-night rides, a ritual of power and pride that had become their signature. Their leather vests bore the gang's emblem, a silver snake coiled around a skull, and their presence was enough to make people disappear from the road. They thrived on fear, on the idea that no one dared to challenge them in their territory. The leader, Snake Malone, rode at the front. He was a broad, scar-faced man, whose reputation stretched across several states. Behind him trailed nearly a dozen bikers, each one armed, dangerous, and eager for trouble. As the group neared the old gas station, they spotted the SUV. Its polished black surface gleamed under the moonlight, out of place among the ruins of rusted pumps and shattered glass. Snake slowed his bike, curiosity turning into arrogance. Who would park out here alone at this hour? He gave a hand signal, and the rest of the gang circled around the station like vultures. The sound of their engines grew louder, their headlights cutting across the woman's still figure. She didn't flee. To the bikers, she looked like easy prey, someone who had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. One of them revved his engine aggressively, kicking up dust toward her. Another whistled mockingly, as they surrounded her, forming a ring of bikes and bright lights. The woman didn't move, her phone now back in her pocket. She stood perfectly still, her posture unshaken, her expression unreadable. Snake finally parked his bike and dismounted, walking toward her with the swagger of someone used to control. He shouted something crude, and one of his men stepped forward, grabbing her by the collar of her jacket. The moment his hand made contact, something shifted in the air. The woman's gaze hardened, not in fear but in silent warning. A second later, the distant echo of sirens began to rise from the highway behind them. The bikers froze, unsure if what they were hearing was real. Snake turned sharply, his confidence cracking as a sound grew louder. Red and blue lights flickered on the horizon, slicing through the darkness. The woman's face remained calm, her eyes steady on the man still holding her. Then, slowly, she raised one eyebrow as the first police cruiser came into view. None of them knew it yet, but that night was about to end very differently than they had imagined. The hunted was not a victim, and the predators had just cornered themselves. The wail of sirens grew closer, bouncing off the empty highway and the crumbling walls of the gas station. The Iron Serpents exchanged uneasy glances, confusion spreading through their ranks. Snake Malone clenched his fists and barked an order for everyone to stay calm. But even his voice carried a trace of uncertainty. The woman they had cornered still hadn't spoken a word. She stood motionless, her collar gripped in one biker's fist, her eyes fixed on Snake as though she were quietly studying him. The tension between them was almost physical, thick enough to make the desert air feel heavier. Snake stepped closer, trying to read her expression. Most people who crossed paths with the Iron Serpents showed fear, pleading, shaking, or crying. This woman did none of that. Her face was composed, her breathing steady, and her gaze sharp enough to make even the toughest man uneasy. The biker holding her began to loosen his grip, sensing something wasn't right. But Snake, too proud to show doubt in front of his men, barked at him to hold tight. Then, from the darkness, came the unmistakable thump of helicopter blades. A bright beam of light cut through the night, sweeping across the gas station and illuminating every biker in blinding white. Panic erupted instantly. Engines roared to life, and shouts filled the air. Some of the gang members tried to flee, but their escape was short-lived. Police cruisers skidded onto the scene from every direction, blocking the road and trapping them in a circle of flashing lights and shouting officers. The Iron Serpents were surrounded. Snake's instincts told him to run, but he knew there was nowhere left to go. He looked back at the woman, still calm, still unshaken. And for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. The air buzzed with radio chatter and the sound of agents shouting commands. Armed officers poured out of black SUVs, taking positions behind their vehicles, laser sights darting across the chaos. The bikers were forced to their knees one by one, their weapons kicked away. Snake raised his hands slowly, glaring at the woman with disbelief. Who was she? Why were the feds here? None of it made sense. The helicopter's spotlight stayed locked on her as if she were the center of the entire operation. Then, in the midst of the confusion, the woman moved for the first time. She calmly straightened her jacket and reached inside it. The nearest officer shouted for her to stop, but she ignored him. When her hand came out, it wasn't holding a weapon, it held a badge. She raised it high, and its golden surface glinted under the harsh light. The letters were clear and undeniable. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The entire scene froze. The bikers stared in disbelief. Snake's jaw dropped as realization crashed over him. The woman they had just manhandled wasn't a stranded traveler, wasn't a victim, wasn't anyone ordinary. She was Helena Brooks, the director of the FBI, the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the country, and they had attacked her with their own hands. As federal agents moved in to finish the arrests, Snake could only watch as she turned her gaze toward him one last time. There was no anger in her expression, only a silent message that he would never forget. The hunter had become the hunted, and the game was over before it even began. The gas station was now a scene of chaos and flashing lights. The dry desert air filled with the heavy sound of helicopters circling overhead, and the shouting of officers as they secured the area. The Iron Serpents, once roaring with arrogance and bravado, now stood in silence, lined up against their own bikes, hands raised, surrounded by heavily armed federal agents. Dust swirled around their boots as the wind carried the echo of commands and radio chatter. The once feared gang was reduced to stunned disbelief. None of them could process what had just happened. Snake Malone's mind raced as he knelt in the dirt, his hands zip-tied behind his back. He could still see her, the black woman in the leather jacket, walking calmly through the flashing red and blue haze like she owned the world. Every agent around her seemed to move with precision, responding to unspoken orders. She wasn't just another official on the scene, she was in command. When she finally stopped beside Snake, the look in her eyes was colder than any prison cell he had ever imagined. Without a single word, she made him understand that everything, every second of their encounter had been part of a carefully planned trap. Just hours earlier, Snake had been convinced that no one could touch him. The Iron Serpents had evaded police for years, their drug routes hidden, their bribes effective, their enemies silenced. But now, he realized, they had been led straight into a snare. The SUVs that boxed them in were part of an undercover task force that had been following them for months. The woman he had grabbed was no stranger who stumbled onto their turf. She had been waiting for them. Agents in tactical gear moved through the scene like a rehearsed performance. Every biker was photographed, their fingerprints taken, their weapons bagged as evidence. Drones hovered above, recording every detail. The gang's custom motorcycles, symbols of their power and pride, were loaded onto tow trucks one by one. Snake clenched his jaw as he watched his empire crumble in front of him, unable to do anything but stare. In the middle of the chaos, Director Helena Brooks stood perfectly composed, her badge gleaming under the harsh light. She gave short, efficient orders to her agents, her voice cutting through the noise like steel. Every movement she made was deliberate. This wasn't her first operation. This was her masterpiece. The Iron Serpents had been responsible for dozens of disappearances, the deaths of undercover officers, and millions in drug money flowing across state lines. The Bureau had tried to bring them down before, but the gang always slipped away. So this time she had chosen to take the risk herself. As Snake was lifted to his feet and escorted toward a waiting armored vehicle, he turned back one last time. The woman he had mocked and manhandled just minutes ago was now the most powerful person in sight. Agents saluted her as she passed. Reporters and local police began to arrive, snapping pictures, unaware of the full story behind the arrest. Snake felt a wave of humiliation and rage boil inside him. The desert was silent again as the helicopters drifted away, the last echoes of engines fading into the horizon. For the Iron Serpents, the night that began with laughter and dominance had ended with their complete destruction. And for Director Helena Brooks, the operation was far from over, because she knew this takedown was only the first layer of something much deeper. In the days that followed the dramatic arrests, the truth behind the operation began to unfold inside a high-security FBI field office. The Iron Serpent's downfall had not been a lucky strike. It had been the result of months of meticulous planning, executed in silence by a team handpicked by Director Helena Brooks herself. Behind the tinted glass of her office, Brooks reviewed stacks of intelligence reports, coded communications, and intercepted messages that had led to that fateful night. Every document was a piece of a larger puzzle she had spent half a year building, and now finally the image was clear. The Iron Serpents were more than just a biker gang. They were a key transport link in a nightwide criminal network that connected small-town smugglers to high-level traffickers overseas. The gang's leader, Snake Malone, acted as an enforcer and courier, ensuring shipments of weapons and drugs moved smoothly through the Southwest. For years the FBI had struggled to catch them in the act. Every raid ended with empty warehouses and missing evidence, as if someone had always warned the gang in advance. That was when Brooks realized there was something far darker happening. Someone inside the system was helping them. Determined to expose both the gang and the mole, Brooks had taken an unprecedented step. She decided to go undercover herself, something no sitting FBI director had ever done. Her plan was bold, risky, and controversial. Only 2 people in the Bureau knew about it: her deputy and the head of cyber operations. Everyone else believed she was attending a classified international meeting. While she disappeared from public view, she carefully crafted a false identity, one that would draw the Iron Serpent's attention without suspicion. The gas station encounter had been her final move. The SUV was wired with multiple surveillance systems, a hidden camera behind the rearview mirror, motion sensors in the doors, and a satellite transmitter in the trunk. Even the flickering streetlight above the pumps wasn't real. It had been placed there by FBI tech teams disguised as utility workers. Every sound, every movement, every word from the bikers had been captured and transmitted to a mobile command unit 10 miles away. The operation, codenamed Desert Coil, was designed to corner the gang without giving them a chance to escape or destroy evidence. As Brooks reviewed the footage afterward, she noted the moment Snake grabbed her by the collar. It wasn't anger she felt. It was confirmation. The gang's arrogance, their belief that they were untouchable, had been their undoing. Within an hour of their arrest, agents had raided 3 of their known hideouts, uncovering hidden drug labs, illegal firearms, and a database of encrypted messages. Those messages revealed dozens of new names, businessmen, smugglers, and even local police officers who had been secretly working with the Serpents. Yet despite the massive victory, Brooks wasn't satisfied. Something about the operation still felt incomplete. The timing of certain events, the sudden reappearance of Snake after months of silence, the specific route the gang had taken that night, suggested a deeper manipulation. Someone had guided them straight into her path, as if trying to help her succeed. But Brooks didn't believe in coincidences. As she leaned back in her chair and stared at the evidence wall, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. The Iron Serpents were just the beginning, and whoever had been pulling the strings was still out there, watching every move she made. The aftermath of the Iron Serpents takedown sent shockwaves through law enforcement circles across the country. News outlets buzzed with headlines about the gang's capture, calling it one of the most successful federal operations of the decade. Helicopter footage of the arrests dominated television screens, showing the Serpents kneeling under blinding lights while agents moved with military precision. Reporters speculated about how the FBI managed to corner such a dangerous group so efficiently, but no one knew the truth, that it had been a personally led mission by the Bureau's own director, Helena Brooks. Inside the FBI's Phoenix field office, the mood was a mix of triumph and exhaustion. Interrogations ran non-stop, evidence poured in, and agents scrambled to connect the dots from the hundreds of files seized during the raids. The recovered documents revealed staggering details: drug routes spanning multiple states, secret drop points in abandoned motels, and offshore bank accounts used to launder millions. Each page uncovered another layer of corruption. What began as a single gang bust had turned into an international criminal web stretching from the deserts of Arizona to the docks of South America. Director Brooks moved quietly through the chaos, her presence commanding yet calm. She didn't celebrate or take credit. Instead, she focused on the details, the minor inconsistencies that others overlooked. During a debriefing, she noticed that some of the gang's internal communications had timestamps that didn't match their physical locations. Someone had been feeding them information remotely, giving them warnings before past FBI actions. That discovery confirmed her suspicion. The Serpents hadn't been acting alone. They'd had protection, not just from small-town cops or bribed officials, but from within the Bureau itself. As Snake Malone sat in an interrogation room under bright fluorescent lights, Brooks watched him through the one-way glass. He looked smaller now, stripped of his confidence and the roar of his motorcycle. He refused to talk, sitting in silence, but the smirk on his face said enough. He wasn't afraid of prison. He was waiting for something, or someone. Brooks could sense it. She'd seen that look before in men who believed they still had power on the outside. Back in Washington, federal analysts began digging through phone records and financial transactions. Within days, they traced a series of encrypted payments leading to an offshore account, registered to an alias connected to a retired bureau official. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became that this case was far from over. The Iron Serpents were just pawns in a much larger game, and the real players were sitting behind desks, protected by rank and influence. Brooks knew she was standing at the edge of something enormous. The public saw the arrests as a victory, but she saw them as a warning. Her instincts told her that this success had made her enemies. The kind of people who didn't make threats, they erased problems quietly. She had exposed a criminal network, yes, but in doing so she had stirred something dangerous inside her own walls. Late that night, as she reviewed classified reports under dim office lights, she paused at a file labeled Internal Security Breach. Inside were the first signs of betrayal, evidence that someone from her own agency had sabotaged previous missions. The handwriting in the margin was familiar, one she'd seen on signed clearance forms and official memos. That discovery chilled her. The enemy wasn't gone, it had been standing beside her all along. The evidence room buzzed with quiet tension as agents worked through the mountain of data recovered from the Iron Serpents. Boxes of phones, hard drives, and flash disks lined the metal shelves, each tagged and logged. Most agents believed the worst was over. They thought the gang's empire had fallen completely. But Director Helena Brooks knew better. She had seen too many cases collapse because of what hid behind the surface. Her instincts told her there was still something missing, something bigger than guns and drugs. Days after the operation, a junior analyst approached the evidence review team with a strange finding. One of the gang's confiscated phones contained encrypted footage that didn't match any known Serpent activity. The video files weren't about drug deals or weapon smuggling, they were recordings of meetings. In the first clip, Snake Malone and two of his lieutenants were sitting in a dimly lit warehouse, shaking hands with three men dressed in suits. When the video was enhanced, the suits weren't ordinary criminals, they were federal agents, The room fell silent when the footage played on the big screen. The men could be seen passing sealed envelopes across the table, their badges faintly visible. Director Brooks stared at the screen without a word. She recognized two of the faces instantly. Both men were seasoned FBI officers with long careers, men she had personally promoted and trusted. For years they had served in the Bureau's organized crime division, supposedly dedicated to dismantling groups like the Iron Serpents. But now, there was undeniable proof that they had been working with the very criminals they were meant to stop. The realization hit her like a punch to the chest. The gang hadn't just survived through luck or cunning, it had thrived because of protection from within her own agency. An emergency meeting was held behind closed doors. Only a handful of people were allowed inside. Cyber specialists, internal affairs agents, and Director Brooks herself. The footage was verified, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with Bureau communication logs. The results were worse than anyone expected. The two agents caught in the video had been in charge of coordinating field operations in Arizona and Nevada. Every failed sting, every ambushed informant, every dead lead, it all traced back to them. They had fed the Iron Serpents classified intelligence for years, helping them dodge law enforcement and silence witnesses. Brooks made the decision within minutes. There would be no public exposure, no leaks to the press. The arrests would happen quietly, and no one outside the operation would know until it was over. She understood the danger of letting corruption rot unchecked. If word spread, it could destroy the Bureau's credibility overnight. But privately, the betrayal weighed heavily on her. She replayed the video multiple times, studying their expressions, their handshakes, their casual laughter. She had trusted these men to uphold justice, and they had sold it for cash and power. That night in her office, Brooks stared at the city lights flickering through her window. She realized this was no longer about one gang or one investigation. The Iron Serpents were merely a symptom of a deeper disease within the system she had sworn to protect. As the clock ticked past midnight, she made a quiet vow to herself. The next phase of her mission would not just clean up the streets, it would clean up the Bureau, and this time she would trust no one. The investigation that followed was unlike any the Bureau had ever seen. It wasn't about hunting criminals on the streets anymore. It was about hunting them inside the very walls of the FBI. Director Helena Brooks authorized an internal probe under complete secrecy. Only 5 people were involved: 2 cyber analysts, 1 trusted field agent, the head of internal security, and herself. Every piece of evidence was handled in isolation, every document coded, and every suspect watched without their knowledge. Brooks knew that one wrong move could expose the entire operation and give the traitors time to disappear. The 2 agents from the footage were the first to be targeted. For days they were shadowed without suspicion. Their communications were intercepted, their financial activity traced, and their homes quietly searched while they were on duty. The findings were damning: offshore accounts in the Caribbean, luxury properties under false names, and coded messages exchanged with known criminals. They had built a double life, feeding the Bureau information by day and protecting organized crime by night. When the evidence became airtight, Brooks authorized the arrests to take place quietly before dawn. At 4 in the morning, tactical teams moved in. No sirens, no cameras, no public scene. Both men were taken from their homes while their families slept, unaware of what was happening. Within hours, they were in federal custody, stripped of badges and rights. But even in custody, they refused to talk. They smiled during interrogation, as if amused by the entire situation. It was clear they didn't see themselves as the end of the line, they were just the beginning. Brooks understood that meant there were more names still buried, more secrets still hidden. As the days passed, the digital forensics team uncovered something that chilled everyone involved. The 2 agents had been part of a covert communication network operating within federal servers. It wasn't just about leaking information, it was an organized system of internal corruption. Hidden in encrypted files was a roster of names, senior officials, former agents, and political figures. Many were still active, working in key positions, Each name represented someone who had taken money, shared intelligence, or obstructed justice. The web extended far beyond the Iron Serpents. It reached into corporate offices, government contracts, and even parts of national security. Brooks knew she couldn't trust anyone outside her small circle. Even within her office, she started working in isolation, sleeping only a few hours a night. Every decision she made was coded under a false project name. The Bureau was no longer a fortress of law. It had become a maze of deception. She began to see how deep the infection ran. Every department, every file room, every computer might hide another traitor. It was a silent war, fought not with bullets, but with information and exposure. When the arrests were finally made public weeks later, the news hit the nation like a bomb. The media reported it as an internal cleanup, but the full truth was never released. Director Brooks watched the coverage in silence, knowing this was only one battle in a much larger war. The people she trusted most had betrayed her, and she had learned a painful truth. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals don't wear leather jackets or ride motorcycles. They wear suits, badges, and smile. Weeks after the arrests, the nation was still reeling from the scandal. The FBI had called it an internal realignment, a carefully chosen phrase that said nothing but implied everything. Reporters pressed for details, but Director Helena Brooks gave only short, polished statements to the media. Behind the cameras, however, the truth was far more complicated. The Iron Serpents had been dismantled, their leaders imprisoned, and their network destroyed. Yet the operation had exposed something deeper, a hidden system of corruption that reached into the upper tiers of power. Brooks had spent her entire career chasing criminals in the shadows, but now she realized the most dangerous ones hid in plain sight, cloaked in authority. Inside her office in Washington, stacks of classified files covered her desk. They contained the names of people connected to the case, politicians, corporate executives, and bureau officials who had either looked the other way or profited from silence. Each name was another thread in a web of deceit stretching far beyond the Iron Serpents. Some were untouchable, protected by influence and wealth. Brooks had enough evidence to end careers, maybe even start a national scandal, but she also knew exposing them all at once would shake public trust in the very institution she was sworn to protect. Justice required precision, not chaos. She worked mostly in silence now, her office lights burning long after everyone else had gone home. Late at night, she would open her secure safe and review the list again, tracing her finger down the names she intended to pursue next. The faces of the traitors she had already caught haunted her, but they also fueled her resolve. The operation in Arizona had not been the end of her mission. It was the beginning of something far greater. She was determined to purge the rot from the Bureau, no matter how deep it went or who it exposed. Beyond the Bureau's walls, whispers had already begun to spread. Some said the director was becoming too powerful, too independent. Others claimed she was waging a secret war within her own agency. Certain political figures quietly warned her to let it go, urging her to close the case and move on. But Helena Brooks had never been the kind of person to back down. She had seen what unchecked corruption did to cities, families, and innocent lives. To her, silence was just another form of guilt. One evening, as rain fell softly against her window, Brooks watched the lights of Washington flicker across the wet wit. She knew what was coming: resistance, backlash, attempts to discredit her. But she also knew that fear was what kept evil alive. She had faced gunfire, threats, and betrayal, none of it compared to the war she was about to fight. In the dim glow of her office, she locked the files away and closed her notebook. Outside, the city seemed calm, unaware of the storm she was preparing to unleash. The Iron Serpents were gone, but the empire that enabled them still breathed in polished boardrooms and marble halls. As she turned off the lights and stepped into the hallway, one thought echoed in her mind. This time, she wasn't hunting criminals on the streets. She was hunting them in the system, and she would not stop until every last one was exposed.